Welcome to another episode of The Dissection. Today I want to ask this question. Is South African media dying? I'm talking particularly about South African news media. On Friday, a popular publication, Daily Sun, announced that it was closing its print publication. Today, City Press announced that it's also closing its print publication, and today is its last day of print. And this leads to the question, is the media dying? Why is the media dying? There are two examples that I want to bring to your attention. One is something that I witnessed personally, and something that is something that I witnessed personally, but from a distance as well. But you're going to be more familiar with the second than the first. But example one, when I was attending the EFF NPA event, one of the things I observed was the small media pool that was covering this event. And it made me just think about the media pools that I've been observing covering all of the events happening this year in South Africa. This year has been a very big year if you think about what was happening in this year. You had, the state of the nation, you had elections, you had all of the coverage at the results center, then you had, the GNU negotiations for the coalition, that type of a thing. So this was a very big year in South Africa, a very momentous year with a lot of big stories that deserved coverage. But as I attended some of these events, I must say I've observed that the media pool is shrinking. The number of journalists who are attending these events is shrinking, right? You still see some of the same people, right? The faces, the big names. But when you look at the broad size, the number of microphones, like when the politicians give those speeches, whenever they're in trouble or at a press release, historically you would see 50 microphones. But as time has been going, there are fewer and fewer microphones that you see on a stage. You'll see obviously Newsroom, SABC, etc. But it used to be that there would be so many. Now there are very few. So that's something that I observed. And when I was at the EFF event, I looked at it and I said, I don't know, man. It seems like the media, the news media in South Africa is shrinking year on year on year. So that's the first example I wanted to give you. The second example I wanted to put to you to think about is the story of Thembisi Melane. Thembisi Melane got a lot of attention this year when she became the Minister of Justice for her VBS scandal or connections, right? She is somebody I think that should have been the face of the VBS scandal from the beginning. Why do I say so? The media knows that she was spending millions when she was mayor. The media knows that she was opening restaurants in Sandton while she was mayor. The media knows that she is somebody who was mayor of a municipality that made deposits into VBS Bank. And then she got benefits outside from one of the facilitators of these deposits to VBS banks. Right? The media has known this for a very long time. So why did the media spend all of its early days when it was discussing the VBS issue focused on the EFF? Because at the beginning, most of the reporting was VBS looters, EFF, VBS looters, EFF, VBS looters, Floyd Shivambu, Julius Malema, VBS, and it was all focused on the EFF. When the mayors who were running the municipalities in Limpopo were ANC mayors, the ANC has enjoyed over 70% support in local government elections in Limpopo for a very long period of time. So if you are covering the VBS story as a story of interest, if you are genuinely interested in profiling the people who benefited, the biggest profile names from the beginning, surely that should have included people like Minister Thembisi Melane. Not only in 2024, about 7-8 years later, that you start profiling her as a person of interest, a high-profile person of interest, when she was always a person of interest in this story. So why did I choose these examples to mention? Number one, I think example one demonstrates a lack of growth and competition in the news media industry in South Africa. Number two, the example number two, I think represents a lack of robust and fair journalism in the space, because a decision was made to focus on the EFF and not necessarily people like Thembisi Melane. That was an editorial decision. It didn't help the people. It didn't provide more information for the people. Waiting 7 years to cover that story didn't actually give, I think, justice to the victims of those particular stories. Because if those things had been covered earlier, maybe this part of the story would have been covered more thoroughly, investigations done earlier and concluded, and the victims, who are the people who were the grandmothers, the grandfathers, everybody says they care about the grandmothers and the grandfathers, they would have got justice for their lost deposits. But it took a long time before Thembisi Melane was profiled, Minister Nkadimeng, and notice she's no longer being profiled anymore. As soon as she was shuffled out of that cabinet position, and by the way, the new minister made a deal with the director of public prosecutions that they're going to share information from the Zondo case. And part of the issue is that apparently Minister Simelane was not willing to give them the Zondo Commission database. So now she's gone. The new minister has, Mamuloko has given them some kind of a deal has been signed to share that information so that there can be some state capture prosecutions that happen. So now that she's out of that place, no more reporting. Have you noticed that Floyd Shivambu is no longer getting a lot of media coverage in respect to VBS? It's like they're waiting for something to happen, then they'll bring back the VBS story. But what kind of reporting is that? Does the story matter? Is it important? Because if it does, it deserves continuing coverage. It's a continuing story. You don't just pick and choose when you cover the story. And then if you feel like, no, Floyd right now is fighting with EFF, let's leave him as they destroy each other with MK. We'll bring back the story maybe if he becomes a bigger threat to one entity or another entity. So here is my view of why the South African media is failing right now and shrinking in size, relevance. They've lost trust, ultimately, is the big point. They've lost trust. But there are some points that need to be discussed. Number one is that they're also a victim of global trends, global tech trends, which have disrupted news media. From the time when the smartphone became ubiquitous and accessible, it started with the iPhone, and then the Samsung phones, the S2, the S3, and then Android spread, Huawei, all of these things, till the point where a medium range phone which is a smartphone, can be found in most people's hands, whether it's a maid, whether it's somebody who works at Pick and Pay, etc., etc. So the ubiquitous access of the smartphone has been disruptive to news media. Social media, in addition, has been disruptive to news media. Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, now TikTok, all of these have been disruptive to news media. Inventions such as the podcast, which is an early 2000s invention, also coming as a result of Apple. Started off on the, what is the name of that player? What is iPod? And then as the iPhone came in, even became more popular. And now we've seen how widespread podcasts have become. Some very toxic, especially some of those gents with microphones talking about women must, and some of the women talk about indota must, these indota must, and women must podcasts, Not always the healthiest, but podcasts have disrupted the news. YouTube, in and of itself, has disrupted the media space. But another thing that disrupted the media space is the on-demand consumption culture. As people went onto platforms like Netflix, Showmax, Disney Plus, and all of these other ones, where you don't have to wait for the program lineup to provide you with the information you need. You can just consume the information you need and want as and when you demand it. So you can watch your series when you choose. You can watch this when you choose, that when you choose. That changed the media environment, the media consumption, and that also affected the news, because sometimes we used to watch the news as we were waiting for another show. right? You're waiting for Scooty's Nice, you have to watch the news. You're waiting for, Bambolwami, you have to watch the news. You're waiting for Generations, you have to watch the news. You name it. This is how we grew up, right? News was one of the things you had to sit through in order to get to the programming that you wanted. And many of us were forced to watch the news by our parents, etc., etc. But some of the cultures have changed around media consumption. I remember growing up, I'd have to go buy all of the newspapers: Sunday Times, Sunday World, Sunday Sun, City Press, Sunday Independent, and then would sit all Sunday reading all of these publications. But as time went and as smartphones became more accessible and more of the medium of interaction, that kind of news culture has died. So these things are global trends that have also affected the local media. But there's something else that has to be discussed. There's been poor quality of leadership in a lot of these media houses. And historically, they could get away with that poor leadership because, when you're just running a big business and it's in demand and there hasn't been anything to disrupt that big business, you're not going to be exposed as a bad leader. But as these trends started emanating, smartphones, social media, podcasts, streaming, all of these things, YouTube, good leaders would have actually gotten ahead of the curve and created the innovations and solutions to be part of this economy in a big enough way and preserve their baseline business as well. Some publications around the world have been able to preserve their print business as well as get into the digital space because both have value. The Economist is an example. They have a digital business, they still have a print business still going. You look at New York Times, they still have a print business, they have a very successful digital business as well. Their newsrooms have not necessarily shrunk, they've maintained the quality of the reporting as well as participated in podcasts, all of these new developments. You find those media houses participating. New York Times has got great podcasts. You look at The Economist, they're participating on podcasts. You look at Financial Times as well, the pink newspaper that's very popular around the world. They're also still doing very well. So there's something about leadership that has to be discussed within the South African framework. Many of these media house CEOs act like they are all that, but the reality is that they are not globally competitive or good, right? And this is another reason. Right. Reason number 3, gatekeeping. Gatekeeping has been a large part of why South African media has failed because it basically kills competition and innovation. If you think about basically current media trends, news media trends, if you switch from newsroom to SABC to ENCA, you see the same faces, the same formats. This also applies to radio. You move from SAFM to this other, to this. It's the same voices. The voice on TV is the voice on radio. Think about Sam Masego, for example. He moves from ENCA to SABC. I don't know whether at some point he was at Newsroom Africa. Lord of the Media, right? That's his social media handle. Same guy, just woo, 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 woo. So now all of this creates a lack of differentiation, a lack of innovation, a lack of competition, a lack of rivalry, because it's just the same people over and over and over and over and over again. That gatekeeping hurts the industry. If there are only 4 artists making music in South Africa, sooner or later people are going to stop listening because it's not interesting. There's no competition. There's no diversity. There's no innovation. That's something that is very important to recognize. But now I'm going to a very, very important thing that has caused the fall of the media: product quality. And what I mean by this is that the media stopped playing its role. The role of the media is to inform the public of current events, critical information that they need to be aware of, you name it. Inform the public, give them unbiased information. Number 2, the role of the media is to speak truth to power. Number 3, the role of the media is to provide a platform for debate where there's no consensus on those on particular issues, whether it's events, developments, whatever. What happens often now when the media, if you think about a news show that you watch, if there's an issue that is contentious, they won't actually have a debate. They'll bring one expert who supports the issue and speak to that particular expert, and that's it, and then they'll move on. Where's the debate? Where's the discourse? Where's the dialogue? If people need to hear both sides, but the media is only providing one side, that media is not necessarily going to succeed long term. So that's something else that the media has done. In failing to inform the public, in failing to speak truth to power, the media then became irrelevant and untrustworthy. You got to think in South Africa, who is power? It's the oligarchs. It's the politicians, right? There was a time when the media was at least robust towards the politicians, but when that was Jacob Zuma. Now, when it's Cyril Ramaphosa, all of the media houses are all supporting the president in one way or another. And you can see that in how they handled the Phala Phala matter, a matter which clearly has some funny business associated to it, but you wouldn't know according to the media houses. The people who are in power in South Africa are the billionaires such as Rupert, such as Koos Bekker, right? These are the people who own multiple businesses. Takealot, Media 24, all of these businesses. Rupert owns so much. The alcohol that you buy, the furniture that you buy, the internet that you access, all of these things, the healthcare that you access, all of these things go through him at some point. So if you think about what's happening in the real world, on the ground, people can see Vodacom misbehaving. They don't see the media holding them to account. People can see alcohol companies adversely affecting communities. They don't see the media holding them to account. People can see a whole lot that is going on. Medical aid is overpriced. Insurance companies are taking advantage of people. Betting companies, online betting. All of these things have become a problem in society. The problems, food in supermarkets, the prices always go up. They never come down. No matter what happens. The pandemic happens, they shoot up the prices. Do those prices come down? Never. Once the price goes up, it never goes down. The media should be the ones who are critical about all of this, but they are not. Think about this. Glencore was a corrupt company. 2010, 2011, 2012. We only found out that Glencore was corrupt when the Americans made them pay a fine for bribing African politicians in Africa, for abusing commodity prices in Africa, market manipulation. They paid fines in the UK to the UK Serious Crimes Office. They paid fines in America, never paid fines in Africa. But when a story gets to regulators and they make you pay a fine, it's widely known for a long time. Regulators are usually the last ones to move. They usually look at the Didi story. Regulators and law enforcement were the last ones to move, even though the word on the street was already there around Didi and what he was doing. What I'm trying to say is, how is it possible that the whole of South African media didn't know that Glencore was corrupt and doing all of those things across Africa and maybe even here? The reason is they didn't want to know because of who was the chairperson of Glencore at a particular time and who was a partner of Glencore at a particular time. It was Shanduka, by the way, in case you're wondering. So they didn't tell us. We had to hear it from the Americans about the extent of corruption to tunes of billions. They only told us that companies were corrupt when they associated with Zuma. But everyone else is like, those companies are not misbehaving, even though every day people know that the companies are misbehaving and affecting them negatively. This is what has ruined the media. You hear that Zuma is doing Stalingrad when he delays cases in court. What about Vodacom? Where's the criticism for Vodacom? As soon as Vodacom doesn't want to pay, the media actually amplifies Vodacom's arguments. No, but Vodacom can't afford it. Vodacom this, but this guy didn't actually invent the thing, etc., etc. But media, aren't you supposed to speak truth to power? Not be the PR for power? Public representative, spokesperson for power? Really? Anyway, the problem in South African media is that the people who own the big businesses are the same people who own the media, right? And they set the agenda, they manufacture consent. There are some books that I want us to work through, and we're going to launch a book club next year. It's coming. I know some people I spoke to. One of the books is called Manufacturing Consent, Edward S. Herman and Noam Chomsky. It speaks about the propaganda model of the media and how the media sets the agenda, what we talk about, and oftentimes that is to the benefit of the owners of the media and the advertisers in those media houses. So part of the reason why the media in South Africa does not have robust criticism of big companies is because those big companies are advertisers, and those big companies are also the ones that own those media houses, or their owners own the media houses. Another book that we need to work through is Why Nations Fail. This book discusses why in many countries you don't see competition, you don't see growth because of extractive business models in capitalism. When you have a few people owning the whole country or owning large parts of the country, those people kill competition, they kill innovation, which poses a threat to them, right? Because they don't want to have rivals. Why expand the VIP when you can control the whole VIP and the politicians as well? Why Nations Fail. This book is linked. There's something known as synoptic reading or syntoptic reading, where you read different texts together to get a broader understanding. And I think that the Dissection Book Club will be doing a lot of this type of stuff because it's important for us to see. There's another book as well, which is known as The Persuaders, the hidden industry that wants to change your mind. Do you know that Rupert and his companies were customers of Bell Pottinger? In fact, Rupert was with Bell Pottinger from the early 2000s. And when the Guptas got Bell Pottinger as a service provider, Rupert complained. And then he said, why are you guys now providing the service you've been providing to me, to the Guptas? Now ask yourself the question, if Bell Pottinger was such a bad and corrupt company, what was Rupert doing with them? If they were manipulating the public to provide certain narratives, what was Rupert doing with them? Was Rupert getting something ethical and clean from them that the Guptas then were not getting? Or was Bell Pottinger providing the same? It's like if you find me, there's a facility in Hillbrow known as Summit. I'm not particularly sure what they do. I've never been in there. But if you find me complaining that Summit now is allowing other people to come in and I'm not the only person sitting in VIP, what was I doing in Summit? Me, myself. What was I in there for? Was I in there to evangelize, or was I in there to also indulge in whatever is provided at Summit in Hillbrow, right? So The Persuaders, also an important book written by a philosopher from the UK known as James Garvey. Why are we in need of this type of understanding so that we can appreciate the diet that we're being given and appreciate the information environment that we live in? So the last thing I want to say around why the media is failing is that there's no adequate funding for startups, particularly media startups. Did you know that South Africa ranks 19th in the world for banking? South Africa, while ranking 19th in the world for banking, ranks 96th in the world for small business financing, and it ranks 77th in the world for venture capital. So there's no funding of small businesses, there's no funding of startups in the same way that there is general banking in South Africa. The banks don't want to provide funding. Why? Because the owners of the banks are owners of the media and they don't want competition. If I control the media, even if it's a shrinking media, it's actually better if it's shrinking, because the smaller it is, the more these big names need my money to survive, the more I can control who gets to speak, who gets to appear on the platforms, and what do they say. So I actually, as an oligarch, if I owned, Vumatel, Distel, Remgro, RateNet, and Dark Fiber Africa, and all of these companies, Energy Exchange South Africa, if I owned Sundowns and I owned African Mineral Resources and Energy, if I owned all of these things, would I want more media or less media? Less. Now, if somebody came to my bank, Time Bank, Nedbank, FNB, and said, hey, I want to start a media house, etc., I want to hire journalists from Wits and all of these places. We want to speak the truth to power. What power? Me. You want to speak about me? Declined. Will it decline your business? So part of the reason why we're not seeing media houses at scale is because those who own and those who are in power have no appetite to be criticized by these new media houses and to create new platforms and voices for competition. And I think we're going to continue to see more and more media houses, close or go online only. But the good news is that they are not God. They don't control everything. Billionaires think that they control everything, but they don't. And the good news is that we have platforms like social media, like YouTube, which are actually disrupting this agenda setting and this monopolization of media by oligarchs. And that's a good thing. So we have lots of platforms emerging. If you think about MacG, SMWX, look at what happened in the American election. Andrew Schultz, Joe Rogan, several, I can't remember all of them. Several other of these podcasts actually played a significant role. CNN, CNBC, all of these platforms that historically have been controlling the election outcomes and having a big voice were struggling to actually tell the people what to think, because the people can see them for who they are. The people can see that you guys are factional, you guys have an agenda. So in as much as we are seeing the fall of historical media, I think we are still going to see the emergence of new quality alternatives. And that gives me hope, because we can't have a few men controlling the discourse of a whole continent. That's very dangerous. I don't know, what do you think? Let's have a conversation. Till the next one.